You. So welcome to CSIS. My name is Murray Hebert. I work on Southeast Asia here at CSIS. We're going to discuss religious extremism with particular focus on perspectives from Indonesia this morning. We got a great lineup of speakers. What I'm going to do is introduce them serially as they speak. So our first speaker is going to be Imam Shamsi Ali, who is a religious scholar, interfaith bridge builder from New York. He leads the Jamaica Muslim Center, but he's also president of the Nusantara Foundation in Indonesia, which tries to build harmony between peoples of different faiths. So Imam, please, over to you, and make some introductory comments.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Indeed, I'm delighted and honored to be here this morning to talk about religions and extremism from Indonesian perspective. I just to take on the brief introduction, I've been here in this country for almost last 2 decades. So I'm proud to say I'm sitting in between two great nations, Indonesia and the United States. And I'm truly proud to speak about the United States in Indonesia, as well as speaking about Indonesia and the United States, to such an extent that the U.S. ambassador in Jakarta used to say that you are basically the ambassador of two nations. You are the U.S. ambassador in Jakarta, and you are the Indonesian ambassador in the U.S. I'm proud also because these two great nations has a very fundamental commonalities. Number one is because the United States certainly is the master of democracy. There is no doubt about that. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. We have over 200 million Muslims in the country, yet Indonesia is a democratic country. And so Indonesia basically is is the best, if I may say, the best country that can represent that Islam and democracy are going along, that there is no contradiction between Islam and democracy. The nature of Islam in Indonesia itself is very unique. Number one, because Islam came to Indonesia through peaceful means. There was no war. It was the Yemeni traders who came to Indonesia in the 7th century who brought in Islam to Indonesia unintended. They just came as traders, and Indonesian people washed them with their character and behaviors. And that itself basically is transformed or transferred to Indonesian people to be Muslims by character. It's not only as an ideology, but by character. Islam in Indonesia is very modern. One example is here sitting to my side is a woman who is very prominent, leading one of the oldest and the most prominent, if you may say in Arabic, it's more popular in the West, madrasa, just for girls, of 1,000 students in the country that had produced many women leaders in the country. Women are respected. It is a law in Indonesia that each political party must have 30% female candidates. Elected or not is something else, but you have to have 30% of your candidate to be females. Now, the issue of extremism, I think, is one of the most dangerous threats of our time. And I'm saying this out of my heart because I am here in this country and I see what is going on around the world. But I'm not talking basically only about religious extremism. Extremism in any field is very dangerous, including in politics. And so the question possibly is why extremism happens, why it occurs in any community. There are many factors to mention, but I would like to mention in particular 4 or 5 reasons. Number one is ignorance. Let me just give you one example of my own personal story. When I came to this country for the first time, I rented a house in New York, Queens, Astoria. It's a very diverse community. And my neighbor was an Irish, happened to be a Catholic person, a senior citizen. So every morning he went out from his house, cleaned his driveway and my driveway. In the beginning, every time that he did that, I opened my windows and I developed suspicions. What he wanted to do with me. So I developed suspicions, a kind of fear, let's say phobia about the person. And he showed me his kindness. But weeks, months, years, he never talked about the religion. In fact, he asked me, why your wife covered the head? So we became friends. My kids call them grandma, grandpa. We exchange visits. To be honest with you, he taught me how to be a good Muslim. He didn't teach me Islam, but he taught me how to be a good Muslim. So my point is the ignorant can lead into suspicion, into fear, into phobia. So ignorance, number one. Number two, media. I still remember many years back when I was an imam of the largest mosque in New York. There were 4 individuals arrested in the Bronx, in one of the areas in New York, allegedly wanted to bomb the synagogues in Riverdale, New York. I was the first imam to invite the rabbi to come to my mosque because I wanted to tell my Jewish friends that bombing synagogues is equivalent to bombing a mosque. Destroying a church is destroying a mosque. There is no difference. These houses of worship are the places where God's names are invoked. And so I wanted to tell him. So I invited the rabbi to come to my mosque. No media covered it. The following day, there was an imam from Peshawar said that he supported the bombing of the mosque in New York. The following day, there is a newspaper in New York called New York Post, put it on the headline, says that Muslims support the bombing of synagogues in New York. So this is the way sometimes the media portrayed the community. Similarly about non-Muslims in the Muslim world. It's just similar. You know, I live in Saudi Arabia for 2 years, and I know exactly what the newspaper says about non-Muslim friends. So media, in many ways, do not help us in reducing the tendency of being extremists, being angry to one another. Number 3, certain politics. And I don't have to explain this because we are living it at this moment, how extremism in politics can lead into tension and anger and division and friction in the community. Finally, extremism also happens because of the misinterpretation or interpretation of that religious text out of context. And as a Muslims, I just wanted to give you one example of the Holy Quran. When the Holy Quran says Christians and Jews will never be pleased with you until you follow them. And now, this verse of the Holy Quran is taken literally by people such as Bin Laden, ISIS, and others to say, no, you cannot be friends with Jews, you cannot be friends with Christians, because these people will never be satisfied with you, they will not be pleased with you. So they create anger and emotions in the minds of the people. And so these are among the factors why extremism happens. Finally, I would like to end with this, then how to face extremism. Of course, there's another session for this, but just one word, and that is, I think we need to be wise. What does it mean, wisdom? Number one, we must have proper information. That information must be built on proper understanding. Information combined with understanding is called knowledge. But knowledge without applications is nothing. So we have to apply the knowledge that we know, and that's why our Christian friends, Jesus told us, love your neighbors or love your friends and enemies alike. Muslims say we are compassionate, we are merciful. We have just to apply it. When we do this, we are becoming wiser. So wisdom is needed in facing the extremism at the moment. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Imam Shamsi Ali. Our next speaker is Ms. Fauziah Fauzan, who is the director of the Diniyyah Putri boarding school for Muslim girls in Padang Panjang in West Sumatra. This is an almost 100-year-old boarding school that's training young women about peace, tolerance, moderation. And its students are learning the values and beliefs, principles of the Muslim faith that are compatible with skills, experience, and knowledge necessary to be successful in today's world. Madam Fauziah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mo.
Ibu Fauziah.
Yeah. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. For these occasions, maybe I will talk about the reasons that Islamic education promote peace, tolerance, moderation, and women empowerment in Indonesia. Besides, we will discuss about the religion and extremism, but I will deliver about the real condition in Indonesia that may be quite different from another country, Islamic countries in this world. For 3 reasons that Islamic education can promote peace, tolerance, and moderation in women empowerment in Indonesia. First, it's about the spread of Islam in Indonesia, what just told by Mr. Shamsi Ali, that's the spread of Islam in Indonesia peacefully It is starting on the 7th century until 13th century in Indonesia. And then it is brought by the Arabian from Mecca that took place in the first take place. And then the next text continue with Gujarat from India and Persia also in 13th century. And when the first time Islam came in Indonesia, there have been a variety of beliefs and religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, Dynamism, and Animism has been embraced by the Indonesian people. And even though most part of Indonesia had established kingdom practice Buddhism and Hinduism. For example, the kingdoms of Sriwijaya in Sumatra. But the religion can be received, Islam can be received because it is delivered with a good way, with the principles of equality among people, peace, tranquility, and eliminates caste slavery, and were previously common in the region. And there is no compulsions from society when invited to say the conventions of a Shahadat in Islam, and they do so with pleasure. They were not forcing the local populations to embrace Islam, because in the teaching of Islam that there is no compulsion. The scholar has hold fast to the principle of one verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256. And the spread of Islam's peaceful Indonesia with 4 ways process of entry. First, trade, we just discussed, and then cultural. The spread of Islam is also done by using cultural media, and it was done by the trustees Songo on the island of Jafar, for example. And they bring understanding of the teaching of Islam in a language that is often used by the people, for example, by using Java languages. And also with political power, that the spread of Islam in Indonesia cannot be spread from the support of Sultan. For example, in Java, the Sultanate of Demak is the center of preaching and spreading of Islam to be protected. And the last one is with the educations. And the spread of Islam in Indonesia next is through education school. And the chaplain and the preachers spread Islam to all corners of Indonesia. They went through the Islamic boarding school. And the second, that's what promotes the moderate Islam in Indonesia also from education system in Indonesia, that the law of Republic Indonesia number 20 and 2003 about national education systems regulates the implementations of education in Indonesia. In chapter 1, article 1 and 2 stated that education is a conscious and deliberate effort to create an atmosphere of learning and learning process. And the process of learning will enable the learners to be actively developing their potential and having the spiritual power of religions, self-control, personality, intelligence, and the skill needed for them in managing society, nation, and state in the future. In Article 2, the national education is based on Pancasila, and the constitutions of Republics of Indonesia in 1945. These are rooted in religious value, national cultures of Indonesia, and responsive to the changing demands of the times. And thus, in the chapter 1 and 2 above, you can see that religion is part of the integrated in the education system in Indonesia. That is, education is designed in either public school or religious-based schools. Both must prepare education that makes students can practice religion properly. And thus, the student will have human good personality, morality, and have the skill to live and become a good citizens. And founding fathers, Indonesia independence in 1945, have endorsed these principles. And then the religious subject matter must be by the religions professed by the students. And currently, there are 6 religions recognized in Republic Indonesia, namely Islam, Catholicism, Protestantism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. The education system in Indonesia must accommodate this all religion. And the last ones, what promotes the moderate Islam in Indonesia is Islamic education in Indonesia. That is starting from education Islamic boarding school that established long time before Indonesia's independence in 17th century. For example, Islamic boarding school Sidagiri Pasuruan in East Java, established in 1918. And many Islamic boarding school was established in this century. And Diniyyah Putri Padang Panjang, one of them, established in 1923. And then the Islamic boarding school were active in the struggle for Indonesian independence from Dutch colonialism. And then after Indonesia independence, under the Ministry of Religious Affairs of Republic of Indonesia, religious education received serious attention from the governments, and both in public and private school, the efforts begin with providing assistance based on the recommendations by the National Committee, dated December 27, 1945, stated, Islamic school is a sense ardent source of education and intellectual level of the masses who have been deeply rooted in Indonesian society in general, and both should get attention and real assistance in the forms of guidance and support from the government. And today there are 55,000 Islamic school, madrasah, and 25,000 Islamic boarding school in Indonesia. And then this the aim of guiding and directing students become Muslim who believe according Quran and Sunnah that should be reflected with a noble spirit and capable of being citizen of democratic and accountable as well. And there is the concepts of education in Indonesia, and then there are three main scope of the teaching of Islam taught in the madrasah and pesantren, namely Aqidah, Syariah, and Akhlaq. Aqidah is faith in Islam, that includes all things that must be believed by Muslim, and Syariah is God rules governing human relationship with the three parties, namely man relationship to God, man relationship to man, and man relationship to the universe. And then akhlaq, akhlaq is a virtue that's come from the Arabic. Khuluq, which means that character. And what I want to say in the last ones is that in the conditions of Indonesia today, to anticipate radicalisms and deviant dated January 1st, 2016, President Jokowi held a meeting with Indonesian Ulama Council, and during the meeting has been declared a program Islam Wasatiyah to all parts of Indonesia, including Islamic school, Islamic boarding school. And it is Islam Wasatiyah is the moderate, friendly, and polite, and Islam Wasatiyah not liberal Islam and not Islam extreme. Although it's practiced so far, the implementation Islam Wasatiyah was already underway in Indonesia. And we can see how the Indonesia democracy and religion can be hand in hand in time since Indonesia independence 1945, which is based on Pancasila comprising. First, believing in the one supreme God. Second, justice and civilized humanity. Third, the unity of Indonesia. And fourth, the democracy led by understanding wisdom among honorable representatives from the Parliament House, and also social justice for all Indonesian people. Okay. And for the last one, there is what I want to give a highlight, that the fifth Pancasila principles, namely social justice for all Indonesian people, it means that Indonesian people realize the same right and obligation to create justice social in Indonesian society. And we find that in Indonesia, there is the equal right man or woman done in Indonesia. Namely, there is no difference in salaries between men and women ranging from the working class to the level of CEO. Even women's rights are given more with the maternity leave. And second, the absence of restriction for women to become Islamic leader or ulama. In Indonesia, there are a number of women ulama. Currently, the chairman of Fatwa of Indonesian Ulama Council held by women, namely Professor Dr. Haja Huzaimah Yango, where the fatwa is an opinion or interpretation of the term of a problem related to Islamic law. In Indonesia, the establishment of Islamic law led by women. And the last one, the absence of restrictions of women leaders in Indonesia. We have seen women become businesswomen, CEO, ministers, and even president of in the era Megawati Soekarno Putri. And now, even the vice chairman of the House Representative of Indonesia is woman, namely Lydia Hanifa Amelia, PKS party. And many of the businessmen, political figure in Indonesia, the graduates of Diniyyah Putri, Padang Panjang, my boarding school. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ibu Fauziah. Our third speaker is Shaarik Zafar, who is the special representative to the Muslim communities from at the State Department. He is responsible for driving the State Department's engagement with the Muslim communities internationally. Before taking this post, he was Deputy Chief of the Homeland Cyber and Counter-Violent Extremism Group at the National Counterterrorism Center. Please.
Well, thank you, and good morning. As you said, my name is Shaarik Zafar. I'm the Special Representative to Muslim Communities at the Department of State. It's an interesting title. There's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and there's one of me, and so I find myself traveling a great deal, using technology. Earlier today, I was on a chat session with groups in Islamabad, Peshawar, Lahore, and Karachi, which is actually where I was born, talking about the theme that we're talking about today, about intra and inter-religious harmony and cooperation. So that was a 7 a.m. Skype session with 4 of our counselor posts in Pakistan. So I'm gradually making my way east now and having a very similar conversation. I just want to say how honored I am here to be at this one of our preeminent think tanks, CSIS, which just does terrific work, especially in Southeast Asia, and then also with Ibu Fauziah and Imam Shamsi Ali, how grateful we are that you're one of ours. We'll claim you, even though and then Ibu Fauziah, just how grateful that you are that you would come to the United States and share what I think is a really incredible model. I've had the privilege of visiting Indonesia, and I'll be going back there at the end of next month. And so I feel very, very comfortable in the region. And I think the region, when it comes to Muslim communities, I don't like the term Muslim world, but Muslim communities, I think there's really some incredibly important models. But if you just take a step back, just the importance of Indonesia, as the Imam said, it's an incredibly important partner for the United States. One of the world's largest democracies, largest Muslim majority country. When we talk about the language of democracy, we're speaking a similar language. Pancasila, the national motto, which is very similar, to E pluribus unum, which is R, out of many one. And one thing I often tell my dear friends in Indonesia, including in government and civil society and in the religious establishment, is that Indonesians, and if anybody spent time in Indonesia, you know this, they tend to be quite humble, and which is a good thing. I think that's part of religious tradition, and I think that's just part of culture. In many respects, I wish Indonesia and Indonesians would be a little less humble, because I think what they have to offer in terms of models are actually quite good. I would love for other countries to frankly learn. And so I often say to my friends from Indonesia, I wish you would export your models. Every country has challenges. Lord knows we have challenges in the United States. No country is perfect. But I would love several of the other countries who have majority Muslim populations to have Indonesia's problems, particularly when it comes to extremism and intolerance and things like that. It's interesting. Our Deputy Secretary, Tony Blinken, just recognized Passover with the Jewish community in Jakarta. And I think that, of course, it's a very small community, but I think that the fact that he did that is frankly emblematic of Indonesia. Now, one thing I do want to say, I really appreciated, when it comes to the challenge of extremism, we're in this together. The United States and Indonesia, we're in this together. I wanted to, at the very beginning, just recognize frankly, the brutal killing of a Canadian citizen, Josh Rizdal, who was executed by a violent extremist group. And I wanted to note President Jokowi's strong statement about how that's absolutely unacceptable. And I know that the government of Indonesia, working with its partners in the region, is taking steps now to make sure that these types of things. And I also want to recognize the Indonesian hostages and say that our thoughts and prayers are with them as well, who are also are still hostages. So when we talk about extremism, violent extremism, this is not a theoretical challenge. This is not an academic. This is something that affects Americans in San Bernardino, and it affects Indonesians every day. Groups like Daesh are recruiting in English, but also in Bahasa Indonesia, right? And so they're coming after our young people every day on the internet, elsewhere. And so, what are we doing? Well, I think if you look at how they recruit, how they radicalize, we're dealing with a social science phenomenon. We're not dealing with a hard science, and there's no grand unified theory of the process of radicalization. But there's some things that if you talk to our analysts who study this phenomenon, there's 5 basic factors. One is at the individual level. So what's happening inside that individual's head. The second is the group level. So, group dynamics. So what we found is sometimes terrorists are actually not particularly religious. When it comes to Islam, they're not the ones that, the Imam knows, they're not praying 5 times a day or going to the mosque. But because of group dynamics, because one of their friends goes down a bad path, the others will follow. Then there's the community level. Are there community levels of alienation, community levels of dissatisfaction? The fourth is socio-political, which could manifest as foreign policy. Doesn't have to be, but I'm upset because this country has invaded my homeland, etc. And the fifth is ideological, which could manifest as theology. It doesn't have to be. Now, when it comes to Indonesia, there's a lot of things that I think, notwithstanding these really serious challenges, that I think give Indonesia an advantage. The first is, frankly, Imam Fauziah is a terrific example, is the Pesantren network. And elsewhere in the Muslim world, what we'll call the madrasas, as you said. Has anybody here had a chance to visit a Pesantren? I'd be interested. Who's curious? Who's been? Raise your. I've visited several, and I have to say it's amazing. The ones that I've been to, first of all, the ones I've been to are coeducational, so you have boys and girls studying together. Then there's some that are just boys, some girls. But they're studying religion, right? The Quran and the Sunnah. But they're also studying philosophy, economics, calculus. And you can take your certificate, and from a Pesantren, and you can go to any university in Indonesia, including some elite schools. Our colleague from the Indonesian embassy, you went to a Pesantren, and now you're a diplomat. That's not the case with madrasas around the world, always. Some, but not always. That's a model worth exporting, frankly, and that's something, because part of what these terrorists do is that they claim to be speaking for a religion, but they have absolutely no grounding in religion in terms of they're not alims, they're not members of the ulama, oftentimes, right? And so Indonesia's investment in religious instruction, in religious education, is, I think, something that gives it an advantage, and something that, frankly, it's a model that I wish it would export more. Because not only are you getting religious education, you're learning civics, you're learning other courses as well, and you're learning how to be a functioning member of society. And I found, actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, Imam, but oftentimes you'll have non-Muslims going to a Pesantren just because it's such a great school. Well, geez, my parents, my mother went to Christian schools in Pakistan, right? We see this model in the United States, elsewhere, right? So that's something that is, I think, a strength of Indonesia. The second strength, I'd say, is Indonesian civil society. You've got the world's largest Muslim organizations, Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah, others. And so they also play an incredibly important role in defining what Islam is and what Islam isn't. So these are things, and of course, Pancasila, the tradition of tolerance. Now, the challenge that we're all facing, America and Indonesia, is that terrorist groups are using a language that young people speak and platforms that they use. So traditionally, the way you would get, once a day, you would get, once a week, you would go to Friday prayers, and the imam, you would give a khutbah, and that's great. And some imams give better khutbahs than others, right? But to a young person, maybe, where attention spans are shrinking, people are spending more time on their phones, and that's where terrorists are using, short form videos, things like that. Books, lectures aren't necessarily the best way to reach a young person. So I'm not saying there's not a role for lectures or books. What I'm saying is that some of these larger Muslim organizations should rely on their youth wings, and think about, in addition to our traditional scholarship and speeches and things like that, what are we doing online? Because let me tell you, that's where the terrorist groups are, right? I was at a Pesantren in Jakarta, outside of Jakarta, maybe a couple of years ago, and I saw a flyer about ISIS, Daesh, and it was a flyer. It was great. So there's no question that Indonesia's religious establishment and our partners in Indonesia's government take this threat seriously. The question is, what can we all do to respond to the threat, given the fact that the internet is playing a larger role, given the fact that social media, new media, is playing a large role. Now, I have to say, one thing that I think, one part of the solution, the governments, we have a role, right? And at the State Department, we have a role. We oftentimes we make it a point to bust myths. Terrorist groups claim to be winning. We'll say, actually, you're not winning. You're losing territory. But when it comes to pushing back against violent extremist narratives, oftentimes the governments have to take a back seat. Because, look, I may be Muslim, but I have zero credibility. I'm not an alim. God help you if you're looking for me for religious instruction. And even if I had a religious instruction or credibility, the fact that I'm with the United States government undermines my credibility. And that's something that we know. So one thing that we've realized is that it's more important for us to support, empower, or convene those that do have religious credibility, but also recognize that sometimes it's important for us to have a back seat. Now, but there are certain things that I think can be helpful when it comes, and I think religious leaders can be particularly helpful. So one thing, is highlighting the narratives of victims. Indonesia is no stranger to terrorism, and what are the victims? Highlighting the narratives of victims, of people who've actually faced it. Familial appeals, mothers who've lost their young sons who've gone to fight. Those can be incredibly, incredibly important. Myth busting, as I said, terrorist groups claim to be speaking for Islam or claim to be winning when they're not. I think humor or snark can have a role. I think that's something the government shouldn't be with because we're not funny, we're not particularly cool. And lastly, I think there's a role for religious arguments and religious theology, and that's something absolutely, given our constitutional restrictions, which I think is a good thing, our First Amendment of our Establishment Clause. But even if we didn't have that restriction, I think governments, we when it comes to religion, we don't have often as much credibility. And that's why I think there's a greater role for religious leaders to explain not only what Islam is and what Islam isn't, but also the importance of pluralism, the importance of tolerance and things like that. But what I'd say, and I'll stop here, is that it matters not just what people say, it matters how they say it and what platforms they use. And given modern technology and given the role that modern technology is playing, given the fact that terrorist groups are recruiting in American English and Bahasa Indonesia, I think we have to all consider what's going to be the best response. And so in addition to traditional religious instruction, traditional methods of communicating religious beliefs, I'd be interested to think about what are other ways that we can get religious instruction not only on a 45-minute sermon, but in 25-minute videos. Not only in books that are hundreds of pages, but in apps and things like that. Because I think that's frankly what the challenge that we're all facing, Americans and Indonesians. That's the technology that we have to utilize. So
Great.
I'll stop there.
Great, thank you very much, Special Representative Shaarik Zafar. So we're going to turn to you for your input, your questions, your comments. If you raise your hand, I'll identify you. Then please identify yourself, your affiliation, and then wait for a microphone. And if your question is identified at anybody in particular, please let us know. Who wants to kick us off? Please, back there. Sam, right there. Yeah.
Thank you. Britt Minchell, Renaissance Institute, Baltimore. This is really directed at the man from the State Department. Reverend Dr. Britt Minchell, by the way, Christian. In my latest book, The Book of Meme Law, I came across 55 default settings that memes or social organisms always enact unless they choose not to. You made the difference between Indonesian Islam and Middle Eastern Islam. And in my book, I state quite frankly that the reason that Middle Eastern Islam has gone so bad is because beginning with Britain and now us, we've literally ripped the Middle East apart for over 100 years. And it's a reaction to that. Does that make sense to you?
So, I'm the special representative to Muslim communities. I'm not the special representative to Islamic communities. And there's an important distinction there in the sense that I engage Muslim entrepreneurs, environmentalists, people in Muslim majority countries like Indonesia, in the Middle East, Muslim minority groups in Europe. And some people may be very religious, some people may not be. I'm not, in this official role, an expert on Islam or someone who can navigate the differences in my official capacity between, so-called Indonesian Islam versus Middle Eastern Islam or South Asian Islam. A Muslim scholar who is credible once told me when he was talking about Islam, and I liked how he put it, that Islam is like a clear spring that's very, very clear, and it's so clear and pure that it reflects its boundary. So necessarily, Islam, the river in Indonesia, will be different than the river or the stream in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Europe and the Middle East. And of course, with Muslims, there's certain things that are common, right? And there's certain things that are differences. And I think that's actually, frankly, a good thing in terms of the diversity of people, but who all come together. But I'm not an expert, so if I gave the impression that one form of Islam is better than the other, that certainly wasn't my intent. But what I will say is this, that when it comes to foreign interventions and things like that, this coalition that we've built against Daesh is like up to 66 countries. This is not the fight against terrorism, the fight against extremism, is not something that's purely an American fight, right? If you look at the victims of terrorism, certainly of those, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf, others. Well, who are the victims? Other Muslims, more than anybody else, right? And so the United States, what I'd say, sir, in response to your question, is the United States, what we're trying to do, and I think what we're making a level of success, frankly, is to build this coalition because we're all in this together, right? And so, there's no question that, the history, there's a history in the Middle East. The American involvement has made an impact in the Middle East. But looking ahead, we're all in this together, right? I mean, talk to the folks in San Bernardino, talk to the people in Lahore, talk to the people in Indonesia, talk to the people in Belgium and in Brussels and things like that. And so we're in this together. And so the reason that we're here today, the reason I was so excited about this particular conversation is that I think there's particular models that are particularly useful. I think Indonesia is exceptional in that respect. And so how can we, what can we do together? I'll give you just one example if you can indulge me. One really important effort that I think is an example of the right solution is a civil society-led effort that President Obama and President Jokowi announced during President Jokowi's recent visit to Indonesia. It's this Indonesian-U.S. Council on Religious Pluralism and Respect. And it's civil society-led, Indonesian civil society leaders, American civil society leaders, who are going to say, look, our two countries, we share this respect for pluralism, for democracy. How can we come together to look about how we can promote pluralism, how we can promote religious instruction that's credible, and how can we, frankly, push back against extremism? And I think, look, that to me is a terrific model. I think it deserves a heck of a lot of support. We're behind it. The Indonesian government's behind it. But ultimately, it's going to be Indonesian civil society and American civil society that's going to make it successful. This is an example where I think we're in this together. The United States, Indonesia, Middle East, and and I hope we can start continue to move momentum behind these types of efforts.
Please.
My name is Alfred Munzer, and I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust.
Please take the microphone. Sorry.
My name is Alfred Munzer, and I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust, and I owe my life to an Indonesian family living in the Netherlands, and especially their Muslim nanny who took care of me, and it was completely illiterate. I shared that story recently, or a few years ago for the first time, and then since then, with groups of Indonesian students visiting the United States. And at the very end of my talk, I would tell them, the only thing that I remember of my nanny, of Mima, was that she used to sing a lullaby to me called Nina Bobo. And all the students started singing it, and afterwards, all I got was hugs and kisses from young women in headscarves, traditional Muslim women, and telling me, we are all one family. An incredibly powerful message. So my question is, how do we replicate this? How do we increase person-to-person interaction to really create one world?
Thank you, Mr. Alfred. we have known for the last 4 or 5 years, if not mistaken. When I began the Jewish-Muslim relation in New York, and beyond certainly, now it's become an international movement. And the ground basically because of the passing of Pope John II. So Pope John II died. I was invited along with the rabbi to an interview about Pope John II's interfaith outreach. And so we met this rabbi, and we agreed to convene the first Muslim-Jewish, what we call summit, Jewish Imams and Rabbis Summit in New York City. And imagine when Jewish Muslims were meeting, almost nothing else but conflict. It looks like our connections are being defined by conflict. So we intervened. And I said to the Jewish rabbi, please ask your friends one question. I will ask my friends one question. Do you want to fight till the end or want peace? And every person present says we want peace. So I told my friend that so it means we have the promised land. The question is how to get into that promised land. So we designed several programs. One of those what we call Weekend of Twinnings. Twinning the mosques and synagogues. In the beginning, in 2007, we have 50 mosques and synagogues twinned throughout the United States and Canada. The next year, we have over 100 mosques and synagogues twinned in Canada and Europe. And we expanded that to Australia and New Zealand. The latest one was in Tunisia just last year, where Jews and Muslims are coming together. So to respond to that question, I think we have to be courageous enough in begin the good things. And we must not back up. There are challenges, obstacles in between. I have been accused of many accusations, but that's a good thing. There's a flavor of doing good things. And so my point is that how to expand these good works that we are engaging, I think we need to continue to be courageous because the challenge is there, out there. It's not difficult. Sometimes the challenge comes from within our own community. The most difficult challenge, particularly in building dialogue with our Jewish friends here in the state, came from my own Muslim community because of the sensitivity of the issue. But we must stay up. We must continue to work until we get into that, what I called earlier, the promised land. The good news is that we begin the journey.
Please, the woman over here.
Hello, my name is Lyndon Waite, and I'm from the International Association of Women Judges. And I spent a year teaching in a madrasa in Riau, Sumatra, this past year. So I'm really happy that this issue is getting attention. And my experience at my madrasa was probably one of the best experiences I've had thus far. And my question is, so at my organization, we're working with our Tunisian judges to address issues of extremism, particularly among young women, and the reasons why young Tunisian women choose to leave for Syria or Libya or engage in religious extremism in Tunisia. So my question, particularly for Ibu Fauziah, are there any strategies or advice that you have for our members in Tunisia, our programs in Tunisia? What lessons can Tunisia learn from Indonesia in countering extremism? Thank you.
Okay, it's about the strategy. I just can tell you about the strategy that is using in my school, and also we have in West Sumatra we have 290 Islamic boarding schools also. We have the programs. That's the students in our school have the makes program together with any kinds of religion, also any kinds of countries. For example, in my schools, the student in the second year in junior high school have a program with Singapore, Malaysia, and the first year in senior high school we have a program with Japan or also Europe, and we have it together. We invite also the teachers coming from any kind of country, also from Australia, from Japan, and this makes our students have good feelings that we are the member global community, that we have to stay alive hand in hand, living in harmony, and together maintaining peace in the world. That is what is the program in our school, and we are very active to have programs with any kind of countries. We are members of the 32 Polynesian countries, and also I am being the members of 100 of countries in practicing education, CSIS. I just came from Canada last month. This was what we make in our school, and also it's follow and also implement with another Islamic boarding school in Indonesia. And once what we have a program in our school that we have the school anti-bullying. This is the first time when we have to have a respect to others, and also any kinds of tribes, nations, religions. And also the attitude, what we have a curriculum in Diniyyah Putri, what we call Kuba curriculum, it means that Quran Sunnah brain attitude. What we call this, Al-Quran and Sunnah lead the working of the brain, and it is proved by the attitude. It is reflected in attitude. It means that in our school, if the student have 100 in math examination, she cannot get 100 in the report if she cannot socialize well in the friend. All the subjects related to the attitude, what we call this Quran Sunnah brain attitude. Nobody can, we can tell the student she is smart without any proof with the attitude. All subjects, all the report, also the final values of the report of students is depend on the attitude. And we make the control 24 hours. You know that in our schools, because we are boarding school, the teachers in the dormitory, every room have one teacher, and this observe the student every night. At 9 p.m., after the students take sleeps, the teachers make the report progress and give to the head of the dormitory. And then, and the next in the morning, this will be mixed as the points of the meetings, evaluations of the teachers. Progress of the attitudes, it is observed day by day from the schools and also from the dormitory. This is one example. And now this program duplicated by all the Islamic schools in Indonesia. Thank
There's a hand back there. In the back, please.
Thank you. This is a great panel, and it's great to see you again, Shaarik, and Imam Shamsi. Of course, your great work in New York is I'm from Connecticut, and we follow what you do a great deal. I'm also born and raised in Tunisia, so I'm very familiar with some of the issues that have been discussed. Two quick points that hopefully the panel will comment on. Number one is going back to the question of the gentleman that was talking about basically the foreign policy of the U.S. I think one of the major contributors to creating extremism and extreme groups in the region is some of the foreign policy that we seek. Supporting dictatorship, authoritarianism that closes political space in any society backfires immediately and pushes many of the young people into extremism. Case in point, in Egypt, when we have 40,000 political prisoners, when we have elected officials sitting in prison, that sends a signal to our young generation that democracy doesn't work, that the West is not serious about supporting democracy and freedom, and that's problematic. Also, maybe what we should do is support democracies like the young democracy in Tunisia, and you know, make sure that experience succeeds. Give it economic assistance. I mean, we give the Sisi $1.5 billion, but we give Tunisia $140 million a year. I mean, that's really doesn't send a seriousness about the issue. So I also the dialogues that occur here in the U.S., especially the interfaith dialogues, they're great. I mean, we have to do more of those and reach out to more. But I think also we have to tackle some of the tough questions that we have between our communities. If you talk about the Muslim community, the Jewish community, we can't just let it be about getting together and be good and pat ourselves on the back, but we must tackle some of the issues that our communities care deeply about. One is the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian occupation.
Exactly. I talk about the factors of extremism, and I simply forgot the last one, and that is what you mentioned. That is the realities in the ground. We are talking about realities in the ground. Those realities have been one of the most important factors of extremism in different countries. I've just spoken to some mashayikh in Indonesia, let's say, or in some other Muslim countries, including Malaysia, and they are so angry towards some of political rhetoric in the United States. And they don't see that as the representation of certain person, representation of the United States of America. So I think this kind of attitude must be addressed as well. The absence of freedom, the absence of democracy, the absence of justice in the Muslim world have been one of the most important factors of anger, if you may say, of young generations in the Muslim lands. And unfortunately, as you mentioned also, some nations in the West support those who are in power, oftentimes against their own people. And so we have to be fair sometimes, we have to be honest sometimes, and that's what we discuss. Now, coming to the issue of dialogue, yes, of course, there's no doubt that we discuss that sometimes. But as peoples of religions, I think one important point that we need to underline, that religions must bring us into solutions, not bringing fire into the existing fire. Because oftentimes we see this conflict in the Middle East, and we are becoming even pushing the conflict to become bigger. And so I think as a people of religion, we must be sincere that we want solution. We want solution. And we peoples of religions are not in the position to solve the problems of Palestinians and Israelis. These politicians, this is Abbas and Netanyahu. But we, peoples of religions, must prepare grounds. Because I used to say, imagine, if today Abbas and Benjamin Netanyahu signed an agreement, peace agreement, what kind of peace that we expect in the Middle East if these people have too much suspicions, anger? So who is going to change? It's us, peoples of religion. And that's my role as a peoples of religion in this engagement. Finally, of course, when we come to the dialogue, it doesn't mean to agree on every single issue, but we must disagree. Sometimes we must disagree, but we don't have to be disagreeable.
Yeah, it's good to see you again also. There's an increasing body of research, and certainly we're paying attention to this, the State Department, that when it comes to government restriction, government suppression, military, police brutality, things like that, that actually can be a driver of terrorism violation. No question, absolutely. Because it goes to this broader point about alienation, that if you don't feel that you have a place in society, that and that your government or elements of your government don't treat you fairly, then the whole social contract breaks down, and you have to resort to other ways. So there's no question about that, and that is a point, frankly, that we raise publicly and privately to a range of governments, including in the Middle East, about the importance of not respecting human rights and making sure that they're treating their people with dignity and respect. And frankly, this is an end in and of itself. That's just good government, period, full stop, right? That's just how we should, all government should operate. But there is a role that, if you get it wrong, it can manifest in extremism and terrorism. So, and there's research that supports that. I think coming back to Indonesia, right? The recent election of President Jokowi, I think, is historic because if you look at his biography, and I've studied a little bit, he wasn't a member of the military. That's he wasn't from a sort of, and he won, and guess what? It worked. Democracy it's working, and you had an election and it worked. Now you've had elections and transfers of power in other parts of the world, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't gone as smoothly, and so the question is why, right? And I think there's something special about the values and models in Indonesia there's a reason for that. Now, that's not to say that it's easy, right? It's certainly you look at our political season right now. You can imagine when I travel around the world, what I get asked about, when I'm in Pakistan or Turkey in the Middle East. But and I'll say, look, yes, there certainly is, it's a colorful season, and you hear the stories. But I was so glad that you shared your story, because I think part of what we do, and this goes back to your interfaith point, right now there's a lot of talking about talking. Some interfaith conversations are great, but oftentimes they'll be in a very nice place in New York, there'll be a nice catered lunch, everybody there is kind of on the same page, right? And so and it's great, and everybody will have a nice lunch. People say some nice platitudes, and there's a lot of talking about talking. We should do this. Meanwhile, those of us that are against us, the extremists, they're just talking. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're putting their stories out, right? They're not sitting in the conference rooms having fancy lunches, right? They're getting their story out. And it's a false story. It's a bad story. It's a story that says that if you're a different religion, I can kill you. It's a story that says that religion, religion allows the justification of rape, enslavement, slaughter and things like that. That's a bad story, but they're telling it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, Mr. Alfred, what I would say is part of the solution, there is a role for interfaith and part of that, but I think we have to be much more action-oriented. Now, it's easy for me in government, right? I'm in government. We should. It's ultimately, it really, it requires people to take these interfaith conversations and actually put some actions behind them, like what's happening with this council in Indonesia. But also, sir, your story is great. It's absolutely terrific, and I wish there was a way and I think we should actually talk about it, a way to figure out a way to highlight your story. Because that's something that when I'm in Pakistan next, or when I'm in the Middle East, or when I'm in Africa, I'm going to talk about that story, certainly in Indonesia. And the thing is, it's a unique story, it's a terrific story, but it's not the only story. There's a story of the 1,000 American rabbis that wrote a letter in support of Muslim refugees entering this country. And they did that because they believe that's what their faith calls them to do. There's a story of a Jewish community in Indiana that sends money to Catholic charities in support of Muslim refugees. So you have Jews helping Christians, helping Muslims. There's a story in my home state of Texas, and people, Shaarik, I'm a Texan and an American, so don't ask me, I'm a dual citizen. But I always talk about the great state of Texas, where a 7-year-old boy took his life savings because he found out that a mosque had been vandalized, and he was so upset about it. He was saving up for an iPad, and he took his life savings to the local mosque, who were so taken with it, they actually bought him an iPad. So I guess part of the point, there's a role for interfaith. It's important to have these hard conversations, including in areas like the ones that you talked about, where we don't always disagree, but to put some actions behind it. And there's a role for storytelling, saying that, look, taking your story, you shared it here, I know it's being broadcast live, but what can we do? And I think that's part of the job of the State Department. Part of my job is to frankly share these great stories. So I thank you for sharing it. We need to figure out how to get more people to hear that terrific story. And particularly, I know next week is the Holocaust, is the commemoration of the Holocaust. So I appreciate the timeliness of your story as well.
Did you have a question? Please.
Hello, Assalamualaikum.
Salam.
My name is Nosa. I'm from bundanus.org. I went to madrasah and I went to public school in Indonesia. This question probably for Ustazah Fauziah. I feel that in madrasah there's a lot of, because all of us are Muslim. I don't really feel extremism or something like that when I was in madrasah. But when I went to public school, where everybody mixed from different religions, I really feel the segregation. Now, my question is, what do you think about religious segregation in education system in Indonesia? Is it something good, or should we do something about it? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't know where is your madrasa, so that you feel that you feel that's extremist. Yeah, because I am the members of the organizations of madrasa in Indonesia, and also now we have the new concepts that we have to manage our schools to prepare our Muslim students to prepare to become of the global community in the world. That's a fact. And now, every month we have discussions with the Indonesian Islamic leader, also the directors of any kinds of Islamic school, Islamic boarding school. We have the same opinion now that we have to cure the world. We have to prepare the new generations that can bring living in harmony in the world. This is what we do now. And you know that, for example, now our school in Diniyyah Putri, every day we have Many schools coming from all different provinces from Indonesia learn how to implement this curriculum. What we call the Kuba curriculum. That means that nobody can pass the levels of educations, cannot move to another higher class without can make the proof that she or he have a good attitude. You see that in our schools, after my students in the last year, 12th grade, 9th grade, 12th grade, after finishing the national examination, they still have to stay in the school until she can prove that she can achieve all the standard of attitude we have. This is a program. We have no, in Kuba curriculum, Quran Sunnah brain attitude, we have no homework. We have the teachers who cannot get angry at all to the students. What I want to describe this. This is the prerequisite for the students, for the teachers in our school. What's it called? Yeah, about the character that's be attitude that's be achieved by the students. For example, respectful, honest, sincere, gratitude, patience, positive thinking, humble, compassion, clean, solemn, friendly, disciplined, responsible, diligent, unwavering, istiqomah, taqwa, obedient to God, and self-sufficiency. And this included in math subjects, chemistry subject, Quran subjects, all include. All the teachers observe the students. We have no teacher's role because all the teachers stay in the classroom and observe day by day. You can see that this is the difference what we do now about our realize that we need to living together as the world. We have to start it. We have to embracing all our sister and brother around the world. So we changed the curriculum. And our school gets the awards in the last December from the Ministers of Religion Affairs for this program, and then this will be duplicated with all the others. Madrasah. And so, in our school, if we found the teacher have yelled at the students, not give something hit at the student, but using yell at students, it is the point that we have to say the teacher, it is your lifetime to being the teacher. No violence at all in our school. No bullying. Our school have to clean from bullying. What we do in our school, if senior students yell at the junior student, and it is proved by more than 2 people, then what, you know the punishment? Because in our school, no punishment, but the punishment is for the student is she has to become the servants of the junior for 2 days. Clean up the bedroom, take her to the bathrooms, take all the stuff to the schools, clean the clothes, takes for the meals, pay for the canteens for 2 days.
Wow.
That's good.
That is what you know. So I think you have to change your mind now that we have a different way to make a better generation in Indonesia.
Thank you.
My question.
Yeah.
When I was in madrasah, I see that no extremism happened. When I was in madrasah,
Yeah.
it was really good.
Yeah.
But when I went to public school, I was talking about public school, not madrasah. I feel that there is segregation in education. For example, if I'm a Muslim, I have to take only Islam religion as my study. You know what I mean? As part of my study. If there is a Christian in my Islam class, they have to go out of the class.
Yes.
Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Now,
Because he has also the
No, but-
Christian lecture.
Yes, so I can say something. So basically, this is the agreement between groups of religions in the country. The Christian people want their kids to study Christianity. while Muslims want their kids to study Islam. So the agreement between the group, if there was no agreement, they can learn. We welcome the Christians to learn Islam, and certainly I have been learning the Bible for quite a long time. There is no problem for me. So this is just a mutual agreement between the groups of people in Indonesia. It doesn't mean the discrimination, by the way.
Yeah, I this is actually an interesting point. So, and we've seen this manifest in other countries as well. So oftentimes, madrasa in Arabic, it means school.
Yes.
It doesn't, it's just a school. So you could have a university that's called a madrasa. I've been to some madrasas where it's like walking into a 5-star hotel. It's amazing in terms of the facilities and things. And some are quite, basic as well. But it just means school, as we know. What's interesting is, look, there's some madrasas, we have to be honest, that are not shaped, it's just rote memorization. You're not learning anything but the Quran. You're not even learning the meaning of the Quran. You're just learning how to pronounce the Quran, right? And there's no critical thinking or that. That does but there are many, many, including in Indonesia, where you're learning, what Indonesians would be, Islam, but also other things. So I think it's unfair to criticize madrasas, because oftentimes what we find is what you found, is the issue is not necessarily in madrasas, but it'll be in universities and things like that. Oftentimes, and I think that was the point that you were making, and we've seen that. And oftentimes, the people who go down this path of radicalization and violence aren't the ones that are not alims, aren't people who have traditional religious instruction. They'll be scientists or engineers, people whose area of focus is really black or white. Whereas, as opposed to philosophy or religion, where you have to look at context, things like that. The other thing is that oftentimes the groups that are in power, the student groups at universities, are the ones, they're the ones that are dictating, what's taught, how it's taught, and things like that. And you have these groups and so you don't have the mainstream scholar, he or she that's in place, that's controlling. And so the phenomenon that you're describing is of concern, and it's something that we're certainly aware of. Now, my boss, Secretary Kerry, was in my hometown on Monday, or on Thursday, and he gave a speech at Rice University on the role of religion in global affairs. And he talks about, because the reality is, we're a secular government, but we're a deeply religious country. It's the United States. We get it. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, the United States, we're a very religious country, and the world, guess what, is a religious place. So when I was at the White House, one thing that I led, we drafted the first ever national strategy on religious leader engagement in foreign policy. So we actually have a foreign policy about this. We have an establishment clause, we have a constitution where there's a separation, but we recognize. But the one thing the Secretary, whenever he talks about religion, he's in his personal capacity, he's a devout Catholic, but he also recognizes the importance of religion. And by the way, outside of the theological arena, when you're talking about health, development, climate, peace and security, religious leaders, religious actors have a relevant role to play. But one thing that he always talks about was that if he would go back to college, he said this over and over again, he would study comparative religion. The idea of, he would want to study Buddhism and Islam and Judaism. And I think that's the point I think that you were getting to, that I think, there is a value in not only learning our own traditions, but learning the traditions of others. And that's, and I think there's strength in that, because at that point, it's not as foreign. If you look at, this is my last point, if you look at statistics about Islam, people who've never met a Muslim, right, sometimes will have, a very negative view. But if you've met a Muslim, like Mr. Alfred, you met someone, and you have a personal attachment, well, your view of Islam tends to be positive. By the way, that's true of Americans. People who've never met an American, they'll associate America with a view about our foreign policy. But if you've traveled here, you've met an American, you've encountered somebody, then your view of America isn't a policy, but really it's the American people. So that means we just got to get to know each other.
So I think I know there's still other questions. We're basically out of time for this session. What I suggest is, if you have questions, maybe you come up after the session and ask our speakers. But I'd really like to thank Imam Shamsi, Ibu Fauziah, and Special Representative Zafar for your time here. And please join me in thanking them.